So traditionally, DAOs or repositories were always done on the basis of you have one per entity. Now, I think there's all kinds of things wrong with that. And then Jakarta Data came along at a similar time, and the first we heard about it, I mean, there's a funny story, is that I think I forget who it was, it popped up on the Jakarta Persistence saying, oh, we should have something like Spring Data, and we're like, no, I was like, no, we should not have that in JPA, right? Feel free to not be locked into anything. Do what works, not what some person who's in a cult told you to do, not what I told you to do. Figure out what's comfortable to you and what makes your code look pretty.
Welcome to a new episode of The Marco Show. I have a new exciting guest with me today. Who are you?
I'm Gavin King. For the last 2 weeks now, I think. I'm an employee of IBM. So previous to that, I was at Red Hat and then JBoss. Worked a lot on data technology, specifically Hibernate. Started 25 years ago or something like that, maybe a little bit more.
What was your intention when you created Hibernate, by the way, 25 years ago? I mean, did you have a mastermind in place, or did it just...
I think the main motivation was that I wanted to explore this whole world of open source, which was something which at the time was completely theoretical to me, something I was reading about in Wired magazine and in essays on the internet by ESR and people like that. And I wanted to try it out. I had just started in the industry. I didn't have a background in computing. I had a background in mathematics, but been programming since I was a little boy. So I was just starting out as a software developer and didn't really have any clue of what I was doing. But I was working for a company which was an IBM business partner and which was developing applications that ran on WebSphere, right when Java EE was new. Mm-hmm. And
it's been a while, yeah.
Yeah, a long time ago. And really that was before anybody really knew how to write programs in Java, I would say. And so the experience I had with the technology which is available at the time was frustrating. Not wanting to, criticize too much the platform of my new employer. WebSphere was not a great experience. The specifications that it implemented, and obviously most particularly entity beans, were frustrating, and I want to say, perhaps there's something which entity beans might have been good for, but for mapping relational databases, they certainly weren't a good fit. And so I was looking for an alternative to that. And, I kind of was arguing with my boss at the time that we needed to do things a different way, that this wasn't working. And that's how I got to start Hibernate as a way, to kind of scratch that itch, but also because, again, just to see what this whole open source thing was. And I feel like back in those days, there was this really great kind of culture and community around where people could get attention for a project like that just by making something, putting it out there. We had these news sites like theserverside.com where kind of the whole community was there and in all its toxicity and, it was at least 30% flame wars. But there was a real feeling that, just anybody could come out, throw something out there and people would notice it and try it out. And there would be, kind of instant feedback about what you were doing. And, one of the things that's kind of sad these days, I think, is that at least in the Java world has been lost, I would say. I think it's much more difficult now for somebody who's an individual to come along and put something out and get attention for it and have it taken and have the community take notice. And that's very sad.
That's a good point. Going back though, because it sounds like you started Hibernate at the beginning of your career. Were you back then already into databases themselves? I mean, into SQL?
No, actually, I didn't know anything. I didn't know anything about databases at all. As I said, I studied mathematics and a little bit of physics and stuff at university. So I didn't know anything about databases at all. So the first thing I kind of needed to Lauren was, well, SQL, which I'd never used. But one of these things is that like with most technologies in computing, the best way to learn them is not by necessarily sitting down and reading a book, or certainly not by taking classes. The best way to learn them is to try them out and do stuff and just do things and see how those things turn out. Now that might sound like I'm advocating, just doing bad things, doing whatever. No, you have to do them, but with, always with a process running in the background, criticizing and asking yourself, was this really the right way to do it? And what were the the good things, what were the good outcomes and what were the bad outcomes, and can I find a better way to do this? And so, certainly I'm not criticizing the idea of, learning things from books, but I didn't learn SQL or databases from books. And certainly I've never taken a class in any of those things. And so, there are some things which people who are experts in, I'm no DBA, I wouldn't know how to administer a database.
Sure, yeah.
But it turns out that there's a niche kind of in between application development and database administration, which is data access. And it's this niche which is actually quite important that people don't talk about. But this problem of how can a program written in a language like Java interact with a relational database in a sensible way, even though the two sides of the interaction don't share a common language, a common way of some commonality, obviously, a common model of things, right? And so this is something which you actually are hard put to find a book which talks about, and so that is the niche which we've made our home, right?
I just need to add a tiny point on that and maybe for the audience, because I think for a decade I have been suggesting your book. I think it was co-written by you, Java Persistence with Hibernate. Could that be? Yeah, the second edition.
That's the second edition of Hibernate.
Second edition. Yeah. I've been recommending that for ages for anyone who wanted to get started with Hibernate, because I've met so many people in my work life who said Hibernate does magic and it does, random things, and no one understands fully what Hibernate is doing. And it's just, and I said, just read the book, follow the examples, try them out, and you'll understand what Hibernate is actually doing. So even though you're saying maybe not just from purely reading a book, but I would still recommend that book, from back in the day.
So it's something that concerns me greatly if people are saying that Hibernate does magic, which they don't understand, because very much, always Hibernate is designed to do the thing that you would do naturally if you were an expert at writing SQL to efficiently fetch data from databases. So when people say there's something that's magic, okay, well, there's one side of that. I don't know whether they're talking about the magic is on the side of persistence, context, and stateful position. Well, that's a whole rabbit hole we can go down. But if we're talking about the way Hibernate accesses data, I want to say that we try very much to make sure that Hibernate will never generate any queries which aren't what someone who is an expert would write.
Who is an expert? Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Okay. Keep going. Sorry. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Perhaps. But it's not that hard, right? Fundamentally, SQL is a very easy language. It's not very hard, and if you keep a couple of rules of, kind of rules of thumb in mind, first of all, in almost all circumstances, the most important thing from the point of view of performance is to limit the number of round trips to the database. And if you keep that as your kind of guiding light, then most things then you will generally have success, and it will generally be clear that Hibernate isn't doing something ridiculous. It will do things, I have occasionally heard people say, oh, these ORMs are going to generate, hundreds of joins. There's a reason where we do in fact generate lots of joins, is that is the most efficient way to fetch a graph of objects from the database, typically. Not always, but typically. And so there's a reason behind that, and it is in fact what you would do if you were handwriting queries and you knew what you were doing. Right.
I think that might be the issue, because most colleagues I've seen, they didn't know much about databases. They didn't know much about Hibernate. They thought that they could just use Hibernate, and then somehow they didn't have to think about anything that's going to happen, essentially. And then suddenly they complain about Hibernate like a month later, and it's just like, yeah.
I told you my story, right? But from the opposite point of view, our advice has always been that if you want to use this technology as a thing which relieves you from the need to understand what's going on in your database, you're almost certain to fail, right? You do need to. This is sometimes hear people complaining, oh, these ORMs are leaky abstractions. No, leaky abstractions are good. You want your abstraction to be leaky because that's how the air gets in so that you can breathe, right? That's how you can, leaky, a non-leaky abstraction around persistence would be absolutely guaranteed to have poor performance. And so the abstraction is leaky intentionally because you are meant to be thinking about the database, about the tables in the database, about the model that exists in the database, about how you're interacting with the database. And you're never going to be able to get away with that. You have to think about the interaction. You have to be guiding Hibernate. You have to be telling Hibernate what data you need specifically so that it will fetch the right data. We're going to see that in this application, which you're about to show, that we really do have to understand the model before we can even start thinking about how to do persistence from the.
Before we talk about that example, I wanted to ask you something. I don't know if there's a perfect answer, but at the end of the day, when I think of business applications that people build, and let's say you want to show data on a website, so you put it into HTML templates or offer a REST API for someone to consume. And then you have data in a database. And then I know there's multiple religions when they hear that is basically the problem statement, and then they maybe immediately think, okay, let's apply DDD and let's apply 100 concepts how to fetch the data or maybe store the data in a database. How would you in general approach the whole data fetching scenario? Would you just say, make it as simple as possible and not use any of, I don't know, how would you just, approach it?
I guess the fundamental thing about me is that I'm not in any sect. Oh, that's Spanish, English. No, I'm not in any cult, right?
Okay, yeah.
I don't have, if you ask me, how should I write my program? I don't have an answer for you because I don't have an ideology that says, this is how you have to write programs. No, I mean, that's something very contextual. It depends upon you, upon the skill set of your teammates, upon what kind of a program it is. And so you're never going to get an answer out of me like, oh, the way you have to do it is you have to have these constructs and follow this pattern. And no, in fact, there's always been this, long discourse around application architecture. So, I think the hexagonal architectures I looked up on the internet, what the hell is a hexagonal architecture? And the first thing I kind of, hexagonal architecture doesn't have anything to do with 6. Right. Okay. So that was the end of my being interested in hexagonal architecture. It doesn't have anything to do with 6. It's just a cool way to draw a diagram. That's a little unfair. I think there is somewhat more thought that goes into some of this stuff. But ultimately, I don't believe that the best way to understand software is by drawing boxes and sticks on whiteboards. And so my way of understanding software is to think much more at the code level and around questions like readability of code, maintainability of code, type safety. These kind of problems. Architecture to me is something that emerges organically in a program by a process of incremental refactoring.
You would need to have to repeat that 50 million times because that is actually a great line. It is a great line. It really is. Because I've rarely actually seen that in real life projects. Architecture was always artificially put there, from the beginning. And you had to kind of, follow it and religiously and just squeeze everything in. And it never felt right, kind of.
No, it never quite matches because the code is pushing in one direction and then you're trying to shoehorn it into something else.
Yep.
And that's not right. You should let the code take you to a design that makes sense at the level of a code. Ultimately, to me, design, to the extent that it's important, is about thinking about APIs, right? About thinking about the external picture of your system. What am I exposing the rest of the world if I'm a library developer like I am? I'm thinking about what am I exposing to developers. And at that point, I'm like the most anal designer you've ever met. I'm infuriating. I must be the most frustrating person for my colleagues to have to deal with because I'm, extremely exigente, strict with respect to the design of APIs. But then once you get inside the whatever this thing, this module we're building is, then we need to let, things flow naturally and emerge from the code. Of course, that assumes that you are going to dedicate time to, to gardening the code, to this actual process of refactoring and looking and asking yourself, how can I make this cleaner and more elegant? How can I reduce code duplication? How can I, ultimately, I think a lot of this stuff that people talk about often really gives you very little useful guidance on what you can actually do when I'm actually writing code. But there is one thing which stands above all else, and that's dry, right? And fundamentally, that is the first commandment. And when you're writing code, that is the thing which should be pushing you in the direction of the good and elegant thing.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Did I get this right? Do you think in Spanish? Because you were just saying a Spanish word.
No, it depends. I've lived in a Spanish-speaking household for so long that sometimes it's just the Spanish word comes to me.
It's fine. Yeah. I wasn't quite sure. I thought, hey, cool. Right. Then let's jump into our example, actually. And I'm just going to briefly tell people what the whole example is about. You can actually see my screen. The example you cannot, the HTML page I'm showing, but we'll jump into the IDE straight away. Just for you out there listening, I thought we need an example which is kind of real life. So I took an example from my own website back in the day. And what influencers nowadays do is they sell courses online. So I thought a great example would be, let's have a website where we can just buy courses, online programming courses. And essentially what you have is a simple product page. So you can display one course, like a Spring Boot masterclass, which you see on the screen. And to make it a bit more realistic, there can be different versions of the course, or different packages of the course. So it could be that it's just a basic package. It could be a premium package with some videos or whatever. Then we have team sizes. So the course could be available in different licenses for like an individual, for 5 people, 10 people, whatever have you. And then we're going to make it even more realistic, saying we have purchasing power parity, I think it's called. So we have different prices for different countries in different currencies with different taxes also. So you will see different prices, or you are able to see different prices depending on from where you access the website from. And we have a tiny project prepared, and that's why I'm going to jump into the IDE. And I'm just going to show you roughly how our own AI, Junie, would solve the problem, because I let Junie generate some code, a tiny Spring Boot project for that. We have a Spring Boot project, which you can still clone afterwards and check it out yourself. I'm just going to show you how you, in a Spring Boot universe, you would usually tackle this problem, right? So we started with a database. We have database tables available. So everything I showed you is we have books that people can buy. We have guides that people can buy. We have plus guides that people can buy. I talked about tax rates and exchange rates for different currencies and different taxes. And we have a couple of other tables which already exist for the different packages, the different team sizes, and also discounts. I forgot the discounts, right? So we have that database set up. And now to just briefly show you what people would do is they would probably think of, well, every database table inside my database, I'm going to create a entity. So I have a package entities here, or model package here. We have a books entity, exchange rate entity. I just have one and one. I mean, for every table, I have an entity, right? I have a product controller, which is where my HTML page, the Get Products page, is being built. And the way that looks like is in the Spring Boot universe, I probably have something which is called a product service, with one method, which fetches me all the data I need for my HTML template, converts it to a DTO, so a product DTO in this case, and this DTO is what's going to be displayed later on to the user. And when I step inside this method here, the product service, I can see that I'm trying to get one specific plus guide / course here. I might just have a plus guide repository, and you'll find there's a ton of repositories I have already here. These are basic Spring Data repositories. So I have an exchange rate repository. For every entity, essentially, I have a dedicated repository, right? With some queries here and some auto-generated methods. So it's just Spring Data JPA by default. Right, back to the service just briefly. What happens is I call this one method, which gives me a plus guide. And then I need much more data still, which means I'm going to jump into the convert to product DTO methods. Again, I didn't create that code, but Junie did. But in any case, I'm doing some mapping here from my entities to the DTO. And as I need more and more data, I'm just going to call more and more repository methods. So find me some packages, please. Find me the correct team size, licenses, the different ones. And then later on at some point, there must also be another method, which I can't find right now, to apply some discounts and to apply the tax rates and to apply the exchange rates, right? I think it's down here somewhere, right? Exactly. So essentially what we do is we have one service. We call, 5 to 10, repository methods along the way, and these will fetch data from the database tables. And this is how people would maybe structure, try to solve this problem essentially. And what I've asked you beforehand is, Gavin, please, could you kind of come up with a way of how would you maybe solve this problem or this issue? That's why I think, we could switch to your laptop and screen and just kind of talk through how you would approach this problem and how you would tackle it.
I prefer to start off by having a look at what we have there, right? Yeah. When I first saw it, I didn't realize that it was Junie who had produced it, but I pretty quickly figured out that that was what it was. And the reason is that what you have there is, as you say, what I think is very common for people to naturally write by hand. So what do we have here? We have, as you say, an entity per table. When I have some code which knows how to fetch a single entity, and then I have orchestrating code which goes back and when it wants to fetch related data. In this case, they're kind of collection. They're many valued. It goes back to the repositories with a query for everything that points back to this. So there's a very common way to that you'll see in handwritten code of whatever sort, right? Now, when I first looked at that, I thought, oh well, I know what's wrong with this, right? We want to do join fetching, and we want to start mapping. One of the things that Junie didn't do was map the collections. The associations is bidirectional. Had some many-to-one associations, no one-to-many. So we'll map those collections, and then Hibernate will be able to, produce some really much more efficient SQL. And I started doing that, but then I started noticing some funny things about the model. So what we need to, first of all, before anything else, is to actually have a look and understand the model. And this is very interesting. This is what happens with any, the common case in developing these kinds of software is that you have a legacy database, and some things about the legacy database are not how you would have designed it necessarily if you were starting from scratch. Okay, so
maybe just to quickly interject, for me, it was important in this example to actually, to start with a legacy database. As you said, this is what usually happens, that some sort of data already exists and some sort of database schema already exists, and you have to kind of work with it. It's not just greenfield where you can do whatever you like. Right. So the schema isn't perfect, but exactly.
I mean, it's the common case. It's the common case, and almost always, if you have legacy data, then it's not going to look exactly like in the thing that would be most convenient for you. By looking at the schema, what I realized here, and it was a bit non-obvious because of the names of things, and it was a bit non-obvious particularly because of how the foreign key constraints have been done. But what I realized is that we really, whereas we have what looks like 3, 6, 9 entities there, we really have 2 main types with subtypes, is what I infer from looking carefully at the schema. So it appears that books, guides, and plus guides are all subtypes of a particular abstract type of thing, which probably doesn't exist there in the database.
It doesn't exist yet, but yeah.
And I believe that something very similar is going on with product pricing, product packages, and product team sizes, that they are also some sort of, or very close to something that's
some sort of
subtyping.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's some kinds of product, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so what we have here is what, if we were, in the terms that, which will be concrete for people who use JPI, a table per class mapping. Well, that's a pretty silly name. So let's rewind and let's talk, go back to Object Relational Mapping 101. What are the three basic inheritance mapping strategies, right? What are they? So the first and the nicest one, when you have a subtyping relationship where especially when the subtype has a lot of attributes that the supertype doesn't have, is what in JPA we would call a joined subclass. So to retrieve an instance of any given type, I do a join across multiple tables. So each of those tables only has the attributes declared by the given type. Okay. And that's great. It's very nicely normalized, very easy to define the non-null constraints and all that kind of thing. It's a very nice mapping strategy. It has, I guess you could call a disadvantage that you have to do a join every time you retrieve an instance. Okay. And so for cases where the subtypes don't define many attributes or columns in the database, it's very common that people denormalize, use a different strategy, which is to denormalize into the whole hierarchy of entities into a single table. And so this is the single table mapping strategy. And it's the default in JPA, and it's the default when most people sit down and write code by hand.
And the unfortunate thing is I've seen that, grow that strategy to having then a master table of 120 columns mapping to essentially the whole world. And, but yeah.
Yeah, sure. Well, this is so a little bit later. We can talk about database refactoring or something, but yeah. So this absolutely happens, right? Because if we keep throwing new subclasses, then this table grows and grows and grows, right? And so that's not great. It's not my favorite. My favorite is the join subclass approach. But again, it's, depends upon what the hierarchy looks like exactly. Then finally, there's everyone's prodigal stepchild. I'm mixing metaphors, but the one that's our least favorite, okay, which is where you have a table for each concrete class in your hierarchy, and that table has all the attributes, including the declared and inherited attributes. We don't love this one because it becomes difficult to map foreign key relationships at the polymorphic level because databases don't let you target a foreign key constraint to multiple tables. So I realize that this is what we have here, with an extra wrinkle, which is that in order to get around this issue, which I just spoke of, which is this foreign key constraint can't target abstract table. What we have here is that each polymorphic relationship is mapped to 3 columns. So we have a plus guide foreign key, a guide foreign key, and a book foreign key. And then there's, which is actually quite clever, and I'm not sure if I've ever seen this before. And then there's a check constraint which says that one of these has to be, there's a foreign key on each of them. There's a check constraint which says 2 of these have to be null, right? So it's kind of clever. And it's the sort of thing you find in legacy data, right? It really is. This is a realistic situation. It's kind of a pain because it's an interesting thing. Okay, so what could we do, right? So we could just say, hey, I have a bunch of tables here with relationships, and I can treat them as I always would. Okay. But then we have to think about about what kind of, if I'm using SQL, JPA or Spring Data or whatever, what kind of association fetching, what is going to result from that? And it actually turns out a little bit tricky to get right. I managed to get some things which were okay, but not perfect. Now I have a pretty high standard for perfect. Okay, but I didn't manage to get anything perfect. Okay, so at this point we should take a step back. Okay, and I think this is right. Okay, when I encounter some legacy database tables, and I find some things in them which are a bit weird, right? The first thing you got to ask is, what am I even doing here? So Marco, right? Here's my question. Here we have a program with one screen. Is this program going to grow a lot more screens?
It is not.
It is not.
It is not.
Then, I hate to say it, if that is the real situation here, then it is hard to go worse than write a SQL query, use whatever you're using. It could be Spring Data, it could be Hibernate, it could be Jakarta Data, it could be 1,000 other things which know how to map a SQL, a square flat SQL result set to a bunch of attached Java objects.
Right, yeah. Just a bunch of records. May I just,
records are, it's hard to go, if that's a goal here. Now, okay, but however, there's one caveat about that, right? Now, what did Junie do? Junie created some DTOs which were a structured tree of DTOs. Now, I suspect that that's probably not what you want, but tell me, is that from your view in the UI, did you want to get back a graph of objects or?
No, not really, no. I just wanted to have the simplest, flattest thing possible to display in the UI, so yeah.
So then, it's hard to, then if that's the case, it's hard for me to justify anything more complicated for that than just write a SQL query and return some records.
Which is awesome to hear, which is great to hear. Yeah, but not really, because it's just a pragmatic way of doing it, essentially, yeah.
I wish I could give you some more sophisticated answer than that, but in this particular case, where I have a program with one screen, that's just going to be the easiest way.
And just because people need to hear it, so they could write a native query with Hibernate. They could write whatever they like doing.
Flip that shit up into records easy as, and as will, I'm sure, Spring Data or anything else, right?
Right, yeah. Just imagine it were to grow much more, kind of. What will we do then, kind of?
Right, so then what, first of all, if I have to think about if I'm entering data, not just displaying data, then things start becoming more interesting, because then I am going to be wanting to ask, how do I, what are my representation of things that I'm putting into there? Again, that might be fairly simple or it might not be. If we're going to start having more complicated business logic, which starts doing operations across graphs of objects, things more than just flashing, then we're going to get into the realm of where object relational mapping really comes into its own. That's not to say you can't viably use object relational mapping. In other cases, you absolutely can. But it's really when I'm having some operations which need to operate over a graph of objects. That's where we're really in the realm of object relational. Okay? If I'm always happy to just get some square tables, then that's maybe not. Okay, so let's go a little bit further than that. So how would we do it? What should we do here? If we're want to have something that's that's going to start growing. One of the things I say, which I'm a little concerned might not be correct in all contexts, but I think as a general rule is correct, is that the approach of writing SQL queries and writing a dedicated Java class to represent each of the result sets of each of these queries is not very dry and will eventually lead to maintenance problems as the program grows very large, right? There is still great advantage to having a type-safe representation in your Java program of the basic things in the business domain, if you want to use that language. So here, what do we have? Now we want to start So making it concrete again, all right? I want to introduce, like if I want to have this model, this reusable model that's going to be used, I want to actually model that elegantly in terms of the things which, in terms of some abstract model which I'm inferring from that schema, right? In which I have products, you said, in which I have something which abstracts over books and guides and plus guides, right? And then I want to ask myself, well, then what's going to be the cleanest way to map those to those tables, right? And honestly, I got to say, the nicest way would be to make a view and map the views, right? Could I do it with, absolutely, I could do a table per class mapping on each side of this relationship, and then, Hibernate will happily join, create SQL queries, which has a join across two unions, and that's perfect, and that's great. But you know what? We could make a view, right? So we could make a view that, two views, excuse me, actually, and map those views in our Java program. That would make things simpler on the Java side. That would be presenting the data to the Java side in a way which makes more sense and is closer to the representation which the Java program wants to work with.
Wants to work with, yeah. Yeah.
Right. Or more, perhaps more correctly, the Java developer wants to work with, right?
Yeah.
And so these views are good. They provide that adapter layer between the actual physical layout of the tables and the Java program and so now we're starting to, and the views get closer to the real conceptual model we have here. People talk about object relational mapping, there being this mismatch between the I actually don't like this language anymore. What we have is an abstract model of the things in our world. And that is realized in various different, not physical representations, various different language level representations, whether that's a relational schema, whether that's Java classes, whether, if you love your whiteboards, whether that's some kind of, UML or some kind of description logic or, whatever it is. You have an abstract model, and then don't confuse the realization of your model in a given language or a given modeling language with the model itself. And so the views will adapt our model to something close to that, right? So that so I think that concretely in this program with this schema you have here, I think that would make things nicer. And plus, it's a step towards ultimately refactoring our database. Okay. And that is, people don't talk much about this, but views are the step to, so we're going to start off with this being the view and those being the physical tables. Eventually, over time, we can migrate to, right? So the
and it probably shouldn't just be we can or we could, but we actually should. I mean, over time, we should put in the work to work towards that.
Mm-hmm. It's like the view that the database is set in stone and it never changes. I mean, excuse me, I understand where that comes from, right? The database, where does it come from? Because the database is very often a shared representation of the shared representation of the data that's shared between lots of different programs, right? And which have different life cycles, development teams, technology, yada yada. And so it makes sense that people want that to be extremely stable, and it should be extremely stable. Like the truth of the matter is that entities are things which are relatively stable. Software is always soft, sure, but they are still relatively stable compared to everything else that's going on, right? And so that's fine, but that doesn't mean things never change. No, data has to change, and in fact, we should. If we care about data, which I think we do. I think in most cases we care much more about the data than the program. I mean, the application, and that if that's the case, and I think it is the case. Mostly, then we should be considering maintenance of the data and evolution of the data and the representation of the data as something that we invest in. Right.
Yeah.
My view.
Did you, by the way, create these views on?
I did not actually do it.
Right? Yeah, but it's great to hear. It really is great to hear because it's just a pragmatic way of approaching it. To be honest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you have any, I mean, in terms of then actually accessing these views, you said early on, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. People can be happy with Spring Data, can be happy with anything else. Probably would like people to see, use some Jakarta Data, for example.
Okay.
I mean,
so I'm trying to think how to put this without alienating 80% of your audience. So Marco, go to so first of all, I had my first encounter with Spring over the
yes you did
over the last week, and it was an interesting experience. So the first copy of this, of this project you sent me had an error in the mapping. Junie had mapped JSON array to a map or something like that. It wasn't quite right. And because of the nature, and when we tried to run it, it was getting some very strange error from Jackson. Jackson complaining that it couldn't.
Yes,
but the error from Jackson was not very.
Yes, when we tried to fetch the data product, we got some Jackson error that I don't know, the square bracket couldn't go into the map or the other way around, something like that. Yeah.
What are we looking at here? You need to open up.
By the way, you can open it up on your machine, and I will just follow you. Around. Yeah.
So where was it? So it was this one. There was a couple like it, but I think it's this one, right? So Junior generated JSON array there as the column default, and I guess is the
right. And just maybe for the viewer to understand, so these products, they also have so-called Twitter infos, which is essentially tweets and metadata from Twitter, which they can have. So it's a JSON column. Which we then had to map to a a map, and I think Junie was mapping it to an array or vice versa. So that was some sort of mapping issue.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's because it's declared. Anyway, I'm not sure quite what happened there. Anyway, but it was quite a confusing error from Jackson, and I didn't know what was going on. Right, so what happened? I was getting this error, and so I put a breakpoint in my debugger, and I tried to. So first of all, this find by AD method, like it doesn't have any implementation, right?
It doesn't, yeah, but it's just generated on startup, yeah.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And so I was like, okay, well, let's try stepping into it, and
then you're probably caught in
CGlib
proxies.
And I got into a bunch of AOP proxies, which I didn't have any clue of what was going on there, and I was like, well, where the hell do I put? And I tried to put the breakpoint in somewhere in Hibernate, which I thought that Spring Data would be calling.
Mm-hmm. It should,
and it didn't get called, and. So I don't know what it was calling. I wasn't calling the obvious method, the find method. I don't know which one it was calling.
Right.
And I was like, well, how the hell do I figure out what's going on here? And at that point, I gave up, right? Mm-hmm. And it's funny because I just spent like a year or more criticizing this approach, right? For exactly the reason. Yeah. And then I was actually right. I wasn't just talking nonsense. Like I actually just got bitten by that in my first ever attempt to use this stuff. So here's a Jakarta Data version of this. Doesn't look very different. I guess the main difference you'll find here is that first of all the repository doesn't extend a super type, and we have an annotation here. So this is an annotation-driven program model. Recently I realized, this is the model I like, but I also realized, from looking at the Spring stuff, one of the advantages of this is that we don't need all sorts of different super types for async, for React,
right? For
different how many different flavors of reactive, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the nice thing is that if we had a reactive version of this, it would return the mutiny uni here, and so these annotations are the annotation based model is just more flexible from this point of view. But what I really like here is that so let's get rid of it, right? Oh God. Oh, of course, yeah. So the implementation is generated by an annotation processor as soon as I hit and backslash.
Mm-hmm.
And here I got something I can step into, right? I can put a breakpoint here and step into this call to the Hibernate Stateless Session, and I can see exactly what's going on, right? And you see that what's going on here is entirely trivial, right? Because all the hard work and all the heavy lifting is being done by Hibernate.
Just maybe a word on the use of stateless session here has because maybe people are still living in the old days of having a stateful session, so to speak.
Yeah, sure.
What's your current thought process on these two?
Yeah, so this is a thing I've talked a lot about the last couple of years, and where I really think that we made a mistake all those years ago. All those years ago, really users pushed us in the direction of the stateful persistence context, where what's a stateful persistence context? Well, first of all, it's a first level cache. So if I read the same data twice in a transaction, I get the same objects back. Good for cross references, and it's great. And second of all, what's a context where we do automatic change detection. And so if I modify an entity, the changes I make to the entity will be automatically synchronized back to the database at the end of the transaction, typically, or before I run a query whose result set would be affected by those changes. And so this is a good model, right? It is the model which probably most people using Java today are using, and it's a good model. But I realize that there are people who hate it, and perhaps some of these people who are talking about Hibernate being too magical, are those people. And so there was always another model, and stateless session is not new. It's 20 years old, right? More. But there were a couple of problems with it. First of all, we didn't put it in the JPA spec, because that wasn't because as far as we could tell, everybody was asking for the other thing. So we didn't put that in. And second, I did it not really knowing if anyone was going to use it. And then I got distracted working on other things for 10, 15 years and never really got finished.
And by the way, to add to that, in your book, I think in that second edition, you put it as a way of doing efficient batch processing. Yeah, so I feel like a lot of people thought it's kind of connected to batch processing in a way.
Yeah, and I mean, right, because why is it connected? Why is it especially useful for batch processing? Because if you have a persistence context and you start loading up thousands of objects, then those objects are pinned into memory by the persistence context itself, right? So if you're doing operations now, I'm not telling you to do batch processing in Java, okay? But there are people who do it, okay? So for those people, you need to either explicitly manage the size of the first level cache of the persistence context, and that's a pain in the butt. And so stateless session, I guess in our ecosystem, given that it had some limitations, sort of, fit it, fell into this niche of, this is good for doing operations across a lot of entities. Okay, and people used it for that, and never really thought, well, hey, actually, you can use this for all through your program, and you'll get something that is at least as good as what you would, get if you wrote this stuff by hand, right? In fact, something that's a lot better, because Hibernate is obviously a lot more powerful object relational mapping. So we want to re-emphasize that object relational mapping is about object relational mapping. It is not about persistence context. Persistence context, that's what everybody wanted at the time, but you don't have to use it. And in fact, in Jakarta Data, the default is to, in fact, the only thing that was supported in Jakarta Data 1.0 is statelessness. So the operations are, you would have update as a explicit operation, right? Mm-hmm. And that would call stateless session.update right there.
Because you were just saying that in 1.0, is it going to change in the future?
So right, in 1.1, we have introduced the concept of a stateful repository, right? And what's a stateful repository? It's a repository where instead of insert, update, delete annotations, you have annotations like persist, merge, refresh, remove, and no update. Okay, and so it is modeled on the JPA model of, and the thinking here is that the typical implementation of a stateful repository would be backed by Jakarta Persistence, and so that is coming in 1.1 among a lot of other things which are almost much more interesting and significant than that one. By the way, I should, before we go any further, I should, so that people can see it. What happens if I make a mistake here, right? So these things, these parameters of a repository method in Jakarta Data are bound by type and by name. And if I make a mistake in that name, then the annotation processor immediately reports that to me. No matching fields.
No matching fields.
The entity class. Same if I get the type wrong, matching field,
which is
type integer,
which is very nice.
Yeah, so that's great. Now, IntelliJ actually also does a good job of validating some of these stuff as well. But you actually need both sides of this validation, particularly because IntelliJ generally only reports things which are in the window in the file have open in front of me, whereas this stuff ensures that you get errors from the client side as well, right? If I through the whole program with change. If I remove a field from my entity, then and I recompile, then all my repositories which use that will break, and I'll get that.
It's a proper compile error, and whereas we just give you warnings essentially in the current file. Yeah. Maybe I need to ask you, because people will think because they're used to the Spring Data repository find method, so find by ID and name equals to and less than and blah 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 blah. Is that going to be the same thing, kind of? Or
you can call this as anything you like, Jakarta Data doesn't care what you call things.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Names aren't.
But it's not like you can like with Spring Data, where then, for example, you would say, find me a plus guide by name and by ID.
No. So so string, currency, string. And so the name here doesn't matter. What matters is these things, okay? So the matching is done by, that's why we get an error here.
Right.
Because it's the name which matches the thing in the
right,
entity.
Yeah, right. And not the name of the method. Okay, yep.
Now, of course, we also have something which Spring Data obviously also has, which is the ability to put a name query on here. In fact, I think, to my mind, the kind of the primary value in repositories is that it gives you a nice place to put your queries, right? And so,
by the way, talking about that, would you then also, if we are still thinking about this very simple example, maybe just have one repository where you put all different types of queries?
That was a point I was going to make. Yeah. So traditionally, DAOs or repositories were always done on the basis of you have one per entity. Now, I think there's all kinds of things wrong with that. First of all, because queries, especially analytic queries, don't relate to one entity. I would say that when you're starting off with small, there's, I'm going to just because I like sometimes to do the opposite of what everyone is doing, I'm going to say a totally legit and good way to do things in Jakarta Data is to have one repository, not per entity, but per controller. It's actually really nice that way, right? Because then you have the queries grouped together, which are grouped together in the user interface. It's quite unlikely that your query is going to be reused between different, they are, then sure, I'm on a repository, right? But I almost want to say that, to me, the default way to start off is a repository per controller, not a repository per entity, right?
You heard it here first. All right. Yeah.
Just because, why? Well, because things should be grouped by topic, right? Not by, and because your entities are shared representations, but these aren't, right? So a repository by entity has quite low cohesion. Yes, low cohesion, right? Not very cohesive. There's no, what are the relationships between all these operations operating on this entity? Okay. And secondly, as I said, like many operations related persistence don't deal with just one entity, right? Again, I've been pushing the idea that, that entities kind of group together as well, right? But they don't group together as trees. And so this notion that some DDD people have that things come in aggregates and everything goes through the aggregate route, that's just not correct with relational data. Relational data isn't like that. You have many-to-many associations all over the place. Nothing says that things have to refer to aggregate root. And so it can also be quite nice to have just one repository for your whole program if it's relative. And so yeah, I think that opens up some options for, but my point is that Jakarta Data doesn't care. You can do whatever the hell you like, right? What is convenient for you? You don't have to, I don't have to tell you what to do because. But
maybe still the point is, if you start out new, you can still, organically start up with a small, simple solution. Maybe put them onto one repository. Mm-hmm. Maybe once you're growing, maybe at some point you might want to split it out. But feel free to not be locked into one solution from the get-go. Is that?
Yeah, feel free to not be locked into anything. Do what works, not what some person who's in a cult told you to do, not what I told you to do. Figure out what's comfortable to you and what makes your code look pretty, right, fundamentally, and what achieves maximum reuse, because the first commandment is DRY, right? And what is type safe, because the second commandment is we don't use strings in code, right? So, which brings me nicely to this. Okay, so our queries, right? So so I'm querying now. IntelliJ actually doesn't think it likes me writing this yet. Sorry, what am I writing? Couldn't write HQL.
We've been drinking.
Yeah. Or currency equals. Where did I get with from? That's crazy. Now everyone can see how incompetent I am. Didn't mind. Okay, cool. So this is your JDQL or JPQL query, right? If we, that's the generated there. It just calls some methods of Hibernate that you could call yourself.
Right.
One of the nice things about this, guys, is if you run into a limitation of Jakarta Data and you need to call, I don't know, something here that like set cache retrieve mode or set comment or something like that. Great. You just copy paste this thing. Oh, sorry. Copy paste the whole method.
Right. You just put
default,
it in there. Right.
And
it uses it. Okay. And then we need to get the session, stateless session.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I need to create a stateless session. And then just this. Import that. Anyway, get object doesn't like get object. Anyway, this works. I don't know why I got an error there, but I don't care. Because it's the same as this one. Find all two. Okay. And now I can go and call whatever I like. Okay, so there's my whole life I was suspicious of code generation. I'm like, no, I want things to work by generic by meta programming or by fancy parametric polymorphism. I love that, right? but this has made me actually start to love code generation, because it all depends upon how good the code generator is and whether it's generating something that's, reasonably similar to what you would write by hand, I guess. And I think the thing is that finally in Java, we got to the point where these annotation processes are well enough integrated into this development environment, of which we're both a fan, and that they just work, nicely and cleanly. And I'm actually honestly surprised that this whole crazy idea all turned out so well. The magical thing about all this is that if you make a mistake here, right? First of all, IntelliJ picked it up. Wonderful. Great work. Second of all,
yes,
my annotation processor
picks it up. Yes, right? Exactly.
So, this is great. This is great stuff.
And if you run that on a CI system, whatever, it doesn't matter. You would just get a compile error.
You get the compile error, and a meaningful compile error. Cannot interpret path expression, right? And so, what I want to say is, this is great. It's a great development experience, but it's but it's also natural, and it's not constraining in terms of how you can express yourself. All right, go ahead with what you were.
No, I was to ask something totally unrelated, because I think you were not working on Hibernate for a couple of years, and then you came back essentially just like 2 years ago. Is that right? I mean,
yeah. So I stopped working on Hibernate a long time ago after getting out after JPA 1.0 and Hibernate 3. At one point, I decided that I'd run out of ideas for Hibernate, and that the things I was playing with and trying to do were making it worse. And
do you have an example of what made it worse? For
on stage, I added in some things so that you could persist XML directly using the session and stuff. And
right.
It wasn't a good idea. It was bad. I mean, it was silly. But anyway, we still have some remnants of that, and I actually found itself to be useful on some of these things which I thought were bad at the time. Actually turned out to be so. Inverse uses this capability to not for XML, but as these map entities, right? Uses that for revisioning. What do they call it? Anyway, for auditing table stuff. So it turns out that there was, and Inverse is actually extremely widely used, even though nobody talks about it. And so this stupid thing I was doing actually turned out to have a use which turned out to be useful. Okay, so I decided that like if I kept, I was probably just going to make it worse, and so I decided to leave it to other people to carry forward. In fact, I made a conscious decision, like, okay, if I'm there like looking over people's shoulder all the time, like that's just not going to.
By the way, were you kind of like the benevolent dictator? I mean, in the project, I mean,
up until that point, absolutely,
right,
yeah, absolutely, I was. And so we got, as far as I was concerned, everything I knew about persistence had been made really nicely, written down in the JPA 1.0 spec. I stayed around for some of the work on JPA 2.0, excuse me, which was, stuff like, you can blame me for the static meta model and which again was pretty bad at the time, but has later turned, that's the foundation of all this stuff, and it's actually wonderful. But it took a decade or more before it actually turned out to be good. Anyway, so I worked on, I was very concerned at the time with how to make this stuff integrate nicely into, we'd been working with the EGP3 group, and, how to make this stuff integrate nicely with the web layer of Java EE at the time. And so, first of all, I experimented with some ideas with the Seam framework, which was a briefly popular thing that some people really did use to. But then from the ideas of that, we proposed a specification which was called Web Beans, right, which ultimately evolved into CDI. And so I worked on that, and CDI is actually a very successful specification. It's now the foundational component model of Jakarta EE, and the way the different specs have all decided to standardize on that as the way to integrate together. So that's been very successful. After that, I worked for about 10 years on Salon programming language, which was sadly not commercially successful. We definitely had some users, and we definitely could write some code in Salon. Ultimately, we didn't have the team size we needed to be able to develop 2 IDEs, plugins for 2 IDEs, and a compiler and a platform. And
how many people did you have working on it, by the way?
I don't remember the exact answer to that, but like, I want to say 7 or 8-ish, something like that. And so it wasn't successful, but a couple of things. To me, it remains, this is my opinion, obviously extremely biased, but it remains like the type system in Salon is the platonic ideal of a type system for a language which has both parametric polymorphism and subtype polymorphism. You cannot do better than that. In a system with nominal typing, excuse me, I should qualify that. So if you have nominal typing, you have subtype polymorphism, and you have parametric polymorphism, that is the correct type system. And you cannot do better than that. And Every other language has a system that's worse than that. Okay. Yeah. My opinion.
It's a fair opinion. It's your opinion, yeah.
I learned a huge amount from that experience about just how important types are. Type safety is the most powerful tool in the toolbox of any developer for the following reason. The least enjoyable part and most frustrating part of my job is waiting for the goddamn test to run. Mm-hmm. And anything I can do, which can find any bug, no matter how trivial, before I have to run the damn tests, is going to save me a huge amount of time. And for some reason, I think most people don't seem to get, certainly everybody on the Python universe doesn't understand this. And but really it is. It's like amazing. And you know what? Vibe coding doesn't change that. Why? Because the kind of bugs that Junie makes are the kind of bugs that we make, right? People I think are kind of, are used to the idea that computers have some certain kinds of failure modes and humans have other kinds of failure modes. And they're used to humans making those kind of errors and they're used to machines making these kind of errors. And they got kind of a bit weirded out when computers start making these kind of errors that humans make, right? Mm-hmm. And very much, okay. At this moment in time, I don't want to, at this moment in time, the kind of bugs that, Junie makes are the kind of bugs, the kind of mistakes that I would make. And, without static typing, you're going to be spending a lot of time running tests. So the combined, time spent waiting to get a response from the coding assistant and time spent, waiting for tests. Man, trust me, time sitting around waiting, twiddling your fingers, switching to Twitter is the most frustrating and demoralizing part of developing software. And it is really, I've been doing some machine learning type, stuff. And it is so frustrating waiting for models to train, right? Like I actually hate it. like I hate AI because waiting for models to train is so frustrating. And so, static typing, my point about that is static typing is still relevant, when we're using coding assistants. Mm-hmm. And in fact, perhaps it's potentially even more relevant. Mm-hmm.
That was an interesting detour.
Sorry.
No, it was. I was just trying to figure out where we were. And we were with at Jakarta Data, the repository, the stateless session, the query methods. Would you mind giving us a brief outlook on what's going to happen in Jakarta Data in the next version, maybe, or what are your long-term visions? And by the way, now remember, I forgot to ask you, what made you come back then to Hibernate and then to tackle, Jakarta Data and all these? So, what's been happening in the last 2 years? Sure.
So first of all, eventually we ran out of money to keep developing Salon, right? And I realized, I realized that it wasn't something we could continue to push forward without more people. Essentially because of the incredible amount of work it takes to keep two IDEs. We had very powerful IDE plugins for two. To keep those working and going forward is extremely, extremely difficult. And without that IDE integration, there was no point for a language of static typing. Anyway, okay. So that then I spent a couple of years being quite extremely demoralized and depressed. Not knowing what to do. I kind of got out of it because I discovered this wonderful thing called edX, and I went back and learned science and maths again, and then I got a master's degree in theoretical physics, and then I was so into that I got another one in quantum stuff.
Really? Right. Okay.
And somehow all that experience just I don't know, turn me back on again. And yeah, so while that was going on, the other thing that happened was that Quarkus came along, right? And so Quarkus is, it's really wonderful. And, again, I don't want to alienate your audience by saying, but I really noticed with Spring Boot that I'm continuously restarting the server. I'm not sure if that's because I'm doing something wrong, but I don't think so. I think that's probably
there are ways around it and DevTools, but I think Quarkus has it nicely figured out.
I felt like I was stepping back in time because Quarkus, I just don't have that experience. It's make your changes. Quarkus is great. And so Quarkus came along, and we kind of looked around and what are we going to do for persistence? We were really viewing this, this was, and some of my colleagues were very much militating against, wanting to make a break from Java E, from Jakarta EE, right? And, on the basis that, this was something that was maybe holding us back, and that it was a lot of effort, it was a lot of work in, trying to shepherd specs in a good direction. So what happened? I sat, we sat down and thought about what we're going to do about persistence, and I wasn't sure by that stage, but I'd been disconnected for 15 years. I wasn't even sure if people still used Hibernate or if it was this kind of dead thing.
And now people were still using it, yeah. Sure.
Yeah, and so I actually, got this big database off Stack Overflow, and I did some analytics on it, and it came up that, oh no, people are still, no, this is still big.
Not just big, but also kind of the default, I think.
That is our understanding now, that it is the thing that everybody's using. Yeah. And yes, there are other things people are using, but there are the exceptions, and that this really is the thing that people use. And so, oh wow, but but where are we? If we've actually been investing in this, and have we been really, or have we just kind of left it there as this thing that was stable, right? That required maintenance, and so we spent several years kind of just trying to drag Hibernate itself into a modern shape, and that was hard. That was a ridiculous amount of work just to get it in a state where it was like not. Where entropy had taken over years, and so that was successful. From that, we dipped my toe back in the water a bit with Jakarta Persistence 3.2, and that was nice. And then Jakarta Data came along at the sort of a similar time. And the first we heard about it, there's a funny story is that I think I forget who it was. It popped up on the Jakarta Persistence saying, "Oh, we should have something like Spring Data," and we're like, no. I was like, no, we should not have that in JPA. Right? I'm like, trying to be diplomatic. I think that if somebody wants this, and they should go away and make their own spec that does this, right? Right. And these guys replied, "Oh yeah, we'll do that. I'm like, I'm never going to hear about this." And then a couple of years later, it turns out that they had actually gone away and started a spec, and then it came back to bite me.
Right, it came back to
yeah.
Okay. Right, it boomeranged back.
True,
okay,
right? It boomeranged back on me, right? And then it was like, it turns out that by that time, me and Steve had been talking, and we'd been thinking, well, what is it that people want? What is it? Why, people are using Spring Data. There must be some reason, right? It can't be that they're using it for no reason, right? There must be something, and so we were trying to figure. But wouldn't it be better if we just generated some methods for your named queries, right? Isn't that what they want out of this? So we were experimenting a lot by that time, and started experimenting with the annotation processor. And so by the time that Jakarta Data came back, we actually had some ideas, and so So the first iterations of Jakarta Data were quite similar to Spring Data, but we said, well, no, I think we should go in this direction. Some of these new ideas. Turns out that I believe that the Micronaut guys had been exploring a sort of a similar direction in their stuff, and so what ultimately came out of it, I think, is really nice. I really think this it turned out surprisingly nice, and so. We're seeing a lot of interest in it. I don't know how many people are using it yet. And so in Jakarta Data 1.1, so anyway, there's enough there to motivate us to invest in Jakarta Data 1.1. And what's coming there is
what's coming there? Yeah.
So first of all, restrictions. So we have a type. So something that comes up over and over again is, how do I write dynamic queries? Okay, where I have some search screen where we have a bunch of possible criteria, and you have to pick between the criteria and the value.
And by the way, this is a thing, just to briefly again, from product work or consulting work. I've seen every project essentially out there trying to rewrite some version of the criteria API, some helper, I don't know, some query helper trying to dynamically create queries. I personally found the criteria API hardcore to use back in the day. And dynamic queries is a biggie. I think that many people struggle with.
No, it's absolutely 100%. It's something that we never nailed. So, funnily enough, some people told me that the old Hibernate criteria API before that I designed before and you had a program actually came pretty close, right? And so, I thought about, well, what was it about that? Well, it was a tree, right? Why is it that people complain about the criteria API in JPA? It's because it does everything. It's a complete model of a query language. And so, everything. First of all, it has two levels of stuff that make it more complicated. Okay, first of all, it's abstract to allow different implementations of it. So, each vendor has its own implementation of it. So that means that there's already a level of factoriness to it. Secondly, you can have comparisons between nodes from different branches of the, you know what I'm saying. And so that adds an additional level of factoriness to it. And the end result of those two levels of factoriness is it's not terrible, but it's not fun either. Yeah. Is this something that vibe coding can help with? Actually, I think what's happened over the years is that all the things that have happened have actually made it better. First of all, addition of local type inference in Java helped a lot. What was the second thing? I forget now. Anyway, whatever. There was a second thing which happened which helped it. And vibe coding, these queries can be vibe coded quite nicely from what I'm seeing, okay? Obviously, they're still not perfectly readable, but so at least you don't have all that typing, because it's all the typing that's a pain in the butt. Maybe that's good. But okay, so with Jakarta Data 1.1, we're back. Okay, so what was it that made because it was a tree, all right? So let's do something that's just a tree. And so you have the idea, okay, I have a root entity, I have these restrictions I can place on its field, and they're just restrictions on the field, right? I can't stick in an alias anywhere. I wish I could show it to you, but I don't have a working implementation of it yet. And I think it's going to be really nice. It's all based off of the static meta model idea, so it's all super type safe. And I think maybe finally, after all these years, we finally nailed the dynamic query thing.
That would be cool to see. Yeah. I need to check it out, actually. Yeah.
Well, we need an implementation first.
Once you have it,
yeah. So that's coming. As I mentioned earlier, that stateful repositories are coming. The spec also blesses the notion of reactive and asynchronous repositories. So we already have an implementation of reactive repositories backed by Mutiny, backed by Vertex. Yes. And what else? So there's a lot, anyway, the point is there's a lot coming in there, and I think it's a small spec that packs up surprising amount of power because it's building on top of other stuff that already exists.
And just from my dummy end user perspective, it was nice to see you come back and suddenly from the outside, it looked like things accelerated kind of in the Hibernate universe, Jakarta Data universe. Stuff was then kind of, really happening again.
Obviously, I can't take credit for all of that. There's an awful lot of people who are working hard, but it definitely does feel like there is a major revitalization that's happened in the whole ecosystem around persistence in Java, there's definitely stuff happening, and I think that if the last time you used these technologies was 6 years ago, and you came now, you're going to be shocked by how different the experience of using JPA 3.2, Hibernate 7, and Jakarta Data 1.0 is like entirely different to the experience of using this equivalent technology, Hibernate 5 and JPA 3.0.
Kind of sad if you're stuck on some sort of legacy version, but I mean, because you've touched on it, what's your take on AI, by the way? I have to ask everyone. I mean, do you happen to use LLMs a lot on a daily basis? How do you find the quality and that sort of stuff?
I think I'm using it the same as everyone. I use ChatGPT to ask questions. Sometimes I ask DeepSeek to do some math stuff for me. I just started the last week or so using Junie for some things. Still figuring out which of the things for which it's worth asking Junie to offer help on. I don't know if I have a take. I think it's obviously it's the second most important thing, or possibly the most important thing that's happened in technology in my lifetime. Obviously. I'm neither a doomer nor a,
Sure, yeah. Do you have, I understand, but do you have like a gut feeling on if, I don't know, anyone who's now starting to code or going to uni or whatever, do you think they should be, I don't know.
Right, okay, so I don't know. Look, I mean, it's impossible to tell because, we don't know at this point how this is going to impact. It's the advances over 10 years have been incredible. Is that going to plateau now, or is it going to keep, or the next 10 years going to be equally incredible? I have no idea. But my basic take on this, and I feel I'm sure I'm going to feel stupid about this in 10, 20 years, right? But my basic take on this right now is the following. Okay, if you hand me a tool which has the potential to make me 2-3 times more productive, probably a massive overestimate, but let's say, for the sake of argument, if you make my labor 2 or 3 times more productive, you're lowering the cost from the point of view of the person purchasing that labor by a factor of 2 or 3, while not impacting my earnings at all. And you're telling me my labor is going to be demanded less? The quantity demanded of my labor is going to fall? That makes no sense. Okay, from just a first order. Now, okay, that's a first order now. Now, I don't know what happens once we go to the second order analysis, okay? I really don't know, how is it, I'm not an economist. What's the elasticity of demand for, is it elasticity of, I forget. I don't know what happens at second order. Maybe there's some limit to the amount of software that the world needs. Sounds highly doubtful. That doesn't sound right.
Maybe
what's the marginal value? Are we close to the point of decreasing, marginal returns from more software? So I think the most likely outcome is simply that we get a lot more software.
Right.
Because programmer labor has become cheaper, but without programmers becoming poorer. But, like I said,
It's a nice thing. Let's see how it goes. Let's see what's going to happen in 10 years, and if we're going to regret our opinions. And,
we're going to regret making these things which are better at doing what we do than we are, right?
Probably, at some point.
Yeah, it could be.
I wanted to ask you a couple of questions coming to a close, a couple of rapid fire questions. I know you're from Australia originally. You've been living in Spain for quite a while and Barcelona here for quite a while. The first random question is, and the funny thing is, because I didn't know these things when I researched them, Australian and Barcelona, do you miss Vegemite or Tim Tams more? Are these two things Australian things? Did I pronounce them right? Yeah. So, and could you explain what these are? To be honest.
So, I mean, Tim Tams are just like chocolate biscuits, and they're very popular, especially among female Australians.
Right.
But yeah, famously. But yeah, no, Tim Tams are great. Vegemite is this stuff that made of yeast that is very salty.
Made of yeast, right?
Yeah, that every Australian kid, at least when in the 80s, grew up putting on their toast.
Okay.
And it's good, except that every person who is not Australian and did not grow up in Australia thinks it's disgusting. It looks like Nutella, right? But it is like not anything remotely related to Nutella. It's like salty and yeasty.
Right. Did you like it? I mean,
yeah, sure. I did. I haven't eaten it for many years, but yeah.
Right. Okay, so shop preference, Vegemite or Tim Tams? For you, any choice, or does it matter?
I mean, Vegemite's more interesting and unique. So.
All right. Okay. Then, unfortunately, I asked you already before the show. Kind of. I mean, I spoiled the question. But could you explain what's fair dinkum? What does fair dinkum mean?
I don't know what fair dinkum means. It's like a exclamation. It's like a fair dinkum. I don't know what it means.
When do you say it? I mean, when would I say fair dinkum?
I like something I understand in context, but like that was more like a 70s, 60s or so. Like Australian culture changed a lot in around the 1980s, and something I associate with the culture from before I was growing up. Right.
Okay.
In what context do you say it?
Right. Okay.
It's not something I would say.
That's what I would say. Yeah. What's the most Australian thing you do that confuses your European neighbors? What makes you Australian? What gives you away?
I'm a terrible Australian. I haven't lived there for 20 years. What would differentiate me? Yeah. What would differentiate me very clearly from Europeans, if like I had would be to walk into the supermarket barefoot.
Barefoot? Really? Okay. Yeah.
This is something that I would do in like where I grew up, where my sister and her husband live, and
that will kind of confuse me. That will kind of.
Australia is a very clean place, right?
Right.
And a very summery place, and so going barefoot is something that Australians do.
Interesting. To be a bit more technical, when I was part of, you had a forum, a Hibernate forum, like in 2009 or 10 or whatever. I think there was kind of a message board. I think every second question was about the lazy initialization exception. Do you still get nightmares about people asking about lazy?
I think people have more recently come to terms with it, but this really is like, I mean, you're really hitting on something very fundamental here, right? This is so fundamental. Like people sometimes think, this stupid Hibernate. No, this is a fundamental limitation here. Okay. So what do we have? We have this problem where the data is all interconnected. Okay, this is not a document database. This is a relational database. Everything is interconnected. There's no trees. It's not a graph either, but there is its representation of a graph is either a connected graph or a bunch of very large disconnected subgraphs, right? And so you cannot. Okay. Aggregates again. Aggregates are rubbish. Okay. Forget about aggregates. You cannot load the whole graph into memory on the Java side at once. Okay, you can. I mean, even if you had enough memory, the number of joins and the massive Cartesian product you would get in a SQL result set would be horrible. So you have to cut the graph somewhere. This is the whole reason why to have success with Hibernate or ORM or whatever, you have to adopt this point of view of, okay, I need to tell Hibernate up front which data I'm going to use in the original query I used to fetch the data so that it fetches enough, and then I'm going to walk the object graph. Okay. So what happens with lazy initialization exception? Lazy initialization exception results from the failure of type safety that is fundamental to this notion of we're going to trim the graph and we're going to do it at a different place each time. Okay, if we knew exactly where we were always going to be cutting this graph, we could put that in some object which indicated, oh, this is something which can LIE, Java, this doesn't work very well, but if I had a language with proper sum types, and then I could, maybe types now, okay, whatever. If we knew where, if we had well-defined points, then we could have well-defined places where we forced you to say, hey, and your code to be aware of it. But we don't, okay? This could happen at essentially any association in this entity model, okay? Now, we try to help you by, if the persistence context is still open, we're going to go off and lazily fetch the thing, okay? The trouble is that lazy fetching is the gun we have handed to you that is oriented in the negative pi on 2 direction. And it is almost the worst thing in Hibernate. The fact that we even let you do lazy fetching. No, Stateless Session does not suffer from this. Stateless Session will refuse to fetch something lazily because all your objects are, and you will always get lazy initialization exception. The lazy initialization exception is your friend. It's telling you didn't get that data and that you should change your original query because that's the way that that data will be available in an efficient way, right? Yes, it's a failure of type safety, okay? But this is something that, look. With type safety, which I love, okay, I'm an absolute.
we can tell. I think we can tell, yeah.
You always do have to keep it in the back of your mind that there's a balance between false positives and false negatives. Okay. Now, if we made you access every association you navigated, you're forced to go through some ceremony to say, yeah, I really think it's going to be there. Essentially a typecast, right? It would be horrible because it's mostly just false positives. And plus, there's no good reasoning that you can do at compile time to know that, oh, that query queried that data, so that's that association is going to be. There's no way of correlating that across those two disparate parts of the code, okay? What can you do instead? Well, you can do the thing we were talking about earlier with, just running and mapping all these things to records, right? Then you won't get the error in your Java code, but you still have to make sure that your records have a map correctly to the. And so, where was I? I forget. Anyway, the point is, it's fundamental. You can't do any better. What you do have to realize is that it's your friend. It's telling you, no, go and fix your query to fetch more data up front.
Yeah. If you could delete one feature from Hibernate forever, what would it be? Is there something where you think, we shouldn't have introduced it, we unleashed something onto the world, kind of?
Lots of things like that, but I think we deleted most of them over the last few years. Yeah, the ones which we really thought were bad, we have actually removed. I've been pretty. So, for example, so the one thing which finally, after many years of gradually being more and more, the worst thing, and people are upset about this. We used to have this way of dealing with detached objects. A detached object is something you retrieved in one persistence context. Close the persistence context. Now you have just some Java objects which are not associated with any persistence context. We come back in a new persistence context, and I change the objects, and I want to propagate that change back to the database. In very early versions of Hibernate, you could do that. You said save or update. and it looked in them and worked this graph, and then persisted the changes back directly, and reassociated that graph with the new persistence context. What happened? This resulted in endless problems, which were far worse than lazy initialization, where people would reassociate these detached objects, reassociate these detached objects, and there's conflicts. There's right word for that. Forget. Anyway, there's because the persistence context is a canonicalization of persistent identity to object, and you can't have two with the same persistent identity. And so it turned out that people that, unless you were extremely disciplined, and there were people who figured out how to be extremely disciplined, but there were also a lot of people who just didn't get it, right? And so that caused, and the problem with that is it results in a kind of error that it's hard to figure out what you did wrong, and more importantly, can sort of transiently happen at runtime depending upon exactly what objects you happen to be, right? And so those are the kind of errors that we have to protect you from. Those things which might or might not happen. I don't mind throwing you an error as long as that error is 100% predictable and explains what it is and and it's easy to connect that. My nightmare is that we have a bug which subtly at runtime in production starts corrupting the data of systems which are processing billions and billions of dollars. Okay, so those are the kind of issues which keep us up. Hey, this is a potential, data corruption. This is a kind of a thing which might or might not happen depending upon runtime on the exact identity of what you're.
Did you ever have such a bug?
We have never up until this day had such a bug. We have had. Wow, that's not true. We have had. I can recall of a couple of cases where we have had bugs which carried some small risk of data corruption, but we've never seen that actually result. We've never seen those cases actually result in corruption in some serious problem in production. We have had bugs which I can remember one actually relatively recently, a change which caused somebody's production application to fall over due to performance. Not data corruption, but still pretty bad. But so far I can't think. No, I mean, as far as I'm aware, I'm not aware of any case where Hibernate can pin the blame on for something, really serious of that nature.
Maybe last question, and maybe I don't know if you've already partially answered it, but if you were starting Hibernate today from scratch, is there anything you would do entirely differently?
Again, like those questions about what would we remove, what we do completely differently. Like we've been asking ourselves that for the past 5 years, and now doing those things differently. Okay, so first of all, there would be no strings anyway.
Right.
The worst problem in Hibernate up until version 5 was bad error reporting. Okay, so when I was just a baby and didn't know how to program, the thing I knew it to some extent, but which I really didn't, which I didn't understand to the extent that I understand it today, is the importance of error messages, right? And reporting errors in a way which is interpretable to the user. And I didn't understand because the level at which the whole Java ecosystem was at in those times was actually extremely bad, right? Like it wasn't Hibernate. Hibernate was relatively good compared to some other stuff in the ecosystem, JSP, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
The errors.
Great fun.
Awful.
Great fun. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So that's very important. So, I think I always recognized that type safety was somewhat important, but we still let some strings creep in. Error reporting. The biggest, I don't know if the biggest, but one of the biggest mistakes I made was not sufficiently differentiating in Hibernate APIs between what was API, what were SPIs, integration points, whatever you would like to say, and what was internal implementation. And that was not obvious. It was kind of obvious. It was that differentiation was sort of there, right, in my head. And I thought it was obvious, but in fact, it was, first of all, it was leaky, right? It's actually extremely hard to design a software system, especially one which grows organically. And so this is, I guess, a counterpoint to my claim that, architecture should emerge organically and all that. It doesn't negate the point, but it's, the other side of it is that when your architecture grows organically, you do need to be, you do tend to have to impose, one of the things you do have to impose from top down is, okay, we're leaking an SPI onto an API, or here we're leaking an implementation onto an SPI. And so those kind of things are quite difficult to sort out. And that was at no point was that done in Hibernate until Hibernate. Work on that started in Hibernate 6. Okay. And so that was a major mistake. It caused problems for us in terms of support, I found out years later, in terms of supporting Hibernate, because it was unclear to customers and to our support people what was the API and what were the things which were supportable, right? And so that was a major blunder, which I was not even aware was going on. And so that's something to always keep in mind when I think things should grow naturally and organically, but at some point you do have to know what's your API and make sure you aren't leaking things onto it. What other mistakes? I should not have just when they made many-to-one. When we agreed to make many-to-one associations eager by default, and I just decided to go along with something for once. Right. Sometimes you don't want to be an asshole all the time, right? Yeah. And that was a huge mistake that it caused, I'm sure. Right. I some things like that where you're like, what is the cost to the industry over the years of many-to-one being eager by default? What's the cost to the industry over 20 years of us not having finished Stateless Session? I don't want to, I have no idea how to put a number on that, but it's it's a big number.
It probably is, but
so,
on that note, maybe we should wrap it up. Maybe now is the best time to say fair dinkum.
Fair dinkum.
Fair dinkum. Thank you very much, Gavin. Thank you. I really enjoyed it. That's us. Folks, we're going to do a giveaway for a 1-year license of any of our products or a coupon for the merge store. You need to put a comment below the video. And the question is essentially, imagine you're going to be an apprentice working with Hibernate, with Gavin together on Hibernate, and you're asked to put a new, exciting, sensational feature into Hibernate, into its next version. What would that feature be? Let us know in the comments. We're going to ask Gavin if he would approve, and the best answer gets the prize. That's it.